your host today. How's the microphone level for everybody? Okay, can you all hear? This table over here is going to be really loud. Before we get started, just a few things. So, you have your folders or the brochures. Inside each brochure, you're going to see a little blue ticket, and that's for door prizes at the end. So make sure you hold on to that. Come on in. There's seats over here. Everybody take out their phone and turn it off, please. As a gentle reminder. The restrooms are out the door to the right if you need to use them. And then the yellow paper, that's kind of new for you. So that's the same survey that you get every month. It's just printed on yellow paper so I can keep track of them better. And there's 2 new questions on there. One is, I'd like ideas for next year's topics. Okay? So these are for you. So if you have something you want to talk about, make sure you write it down, or if you can't think of anything today, email me, text me, call me, so that I can start working on next year's schedule. So that would be great. So I wrote here, if you have a topic you wanted to learn about but were afraid to ask, let me know. We'll talk about it. Also, there is a no obligation coffee date. If you want to sit down and have coffee with me, I buy you coffee. We can talk about whatever you want. We can talk about real estate. We can talk about 1031 exchanges after I educate myself today about them. We can talk about downsizing. We can talk about trust. It's no obligation. I'm happy to sit down and meet with you. It's always a good place to start. And then there is a $50 gift card drawing for everybody that fills out the survey completely and turns it into me. Your feedback is critical to helping me keep the seminars relevant to you, because that's what they're all about. Today's goal is education, specifically to talk about 1031 exchanges and capital gains. Who here knows everything about 1031 exchanges? Who here knows nothing about 1031 exchanges? Yeah. So that's why we're having a class, because I think it's a really important thing. And we're also going to talk about capital gains. It's very relevant when you go to sell a home that you paid $50,000 for 50 years ago. So for many of us in the room, the decision to sell a property isn't about what the property is worth today. It's how much you're going to pay in taxes, right? If you've owned a home or an investment property for many years, it has substantially appreciated, and understanding the potential capital gains can be an important part of deciding whether to sell, when to sell, and what your options are. At the same time, a 1031 exchange may provide another option. You may have heard the term before, but it's often confused about what qualifies for 1031, what type of properties are eligible, how an exchange works, and just as important, what it accomplishes. Okay. As we get older, these decisions become a much bigger part of the process. About retirement income, simplifying our lives, estate planning, and what we want the next chapter to look like. Today we're going to look at both sides of that conversation, how capital gains can affect the sale of a property, and how a 1031 exchange may fit in. Before I introduce our guests, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Understand this is not a sales presentation. It's an educational seminar, but as you know, my name is Terry Diamond. I'm a realtor, that's my day job. But my passion is really serving seniors. I'm a certified senior housing professional, otherwise known as a CSHP. I'm one of only a handful in the entire state. So we've gone through many, many months of ongoing training and education to really learn how to work with all of you, because selling real estate is not an easy thing. It's a very emotional, complex transaction. And for me, it's more about a relationship than a transaction. working with you one-on-one. I don't do a lot of DocuSign. I don't do a lot of the email. I'd rather sit down with you and talk with you in person. Okay, because at this point, that's what it's all about. Real estate can be emotional and overwhelming. I work with a team of people that help make everything go smoothly. So, if you want to have a coffee date to talk about real estate, great. Anything else, that's great too. So, this brings me to today's speaker. I've invited Ken Harris. He's the Vice President and Western Regional Sales Manager for First American Exchange Broker Company. His expertise is particularly relevant for longtime property owners who want to understand capital gains, 1031 exchanges, and the financial and tax considerations that come with selling property. I'm going to let Ken tell you more about himself, because he knows himself much better than I do. And my goal is to keep today's conversation focused, practical, and easy to follow while we make sure that we cover the conversation. You have your notes in front of you. We're going to do our best to follow along the topics. We will have time for questions and answers. At the end, if you have something burning that needs to be answered right then, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll try to cover it. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Welcome, Ken Harris.
Thank you, Terry, for getting me in here. Thank you, Marissa. Marissa's First American title over here. She played a part in getting me over here. As Terry said, I'm here to answer your questions, so feel free to ask questions as we go, and then we're also going to have the Q&A at the end. I want to make sure you guys leave your questions answered. So I'm Ken Harris. I'm with First America, I was just telling Marissa, for 32 years, actually this month. So August 22nd will be 32 years. I started in escrow, jumped to the 1031 exchange division in 1999. And when Terry asked the question, who knows everything about 1031 exchange, I didn't even raise my hand. Okay, so I've been doing it for a long time. And you still get deals every day that are like, you have to think about it, you have to call your counsel, but I should be able to answer almost all your questions here today. So you got the notes, I think Terry mentioned, I'm going to kind of go through that. 1031 exchange, I think there's probably a mix of people here. They own their primary residence, they own their second home, maybe some of you own investment property or real estate, whether it be residential, it could be vacant land, it could be retail, anything that's real estate that's income producing to you is an exchangeable asset. So 1031 exchange, what 1031 is a tax code. So what the tax code says, I'll read the definition: property held for productive use in trade or business, or as an investment property, can be traded for lifetime property without the recognition of gain or loss. Anyone know what that means? I don't really, so. No, it basically is saying any real estate that you hold as an investment can be traded for lifetime property, so other real estate that's also going to be held for investment, to defer your capital gains tax. So Terry mentioned who's bought a property here for $50,000, back in 1975, let's say, and now you're selling it, it's worth $5 million. Well, your gain there is basically the $5 million, right? Or $4,950,000. So your tax consequences is huge. So capital gains, basically your capital gain rate in California, you're going to have a federal capital gain rate at 15 or 20%. So it's at 15% if your aggregate income is less than $400,000, or for a married couple, less than $450,000. I say aggregate income because let's say you don't even earn a dime working, but you have that situation where you have a $5 million sale with a $4.9 million gain, you're automatically in the higher rate because the aggregate income applies to the capital gains tax. So you'd automatically be up in the higher tax bracket for the capital gains. State of California is going to get you for about 13%. So that's in addition to the 20%. And then there's also a Medicare tax that's applied towards capital gains. That's at 3.8%. So you could be up around that 36% on capital gain when you sell your real estate on the gain of the property. I'll get in how we determine the gain too. So you could be at 38%, and then there's also on investment property, there's an annual depreciation that you can take on the property. So there's what's called a depreciation recapture tax that they will tax you 25% of any depreciation you've taken on the property during the time frame that you've owned the property. So if you depreciated the property, $100,000 over the years, they want $25,000 of that back. So that's in addition to the capital gain rate. So, property, when you do that, you're paying that tax. The idea of the 1031 exchange, investment property or investment property, is to, what I say, kick the can down the road, right? So it's a deferral, it's not a tax-free exchange. So when you're doing a 1031 exchange, I say most of my clients are kicking the can down the road until you kick the bucket, right? So what's happening here is I'm moving my gain. You're gonna hear me say probably multiple times today, you're gonna defer the capital gains tax. You have to buy property of equal or greater value and over equal or greater equities to what you sell in a 1031 exchange. So if I'm selling for $5 million, I'm gonna need to buy something for $5 million in order to defer all of my capital gains tax. Now, it doesn't destroy your exchange if you buy at a little lesser value. You can, let's say you buy for 4.5 million, sold for 5 million, you have a $500,000 trade down in value, and you're gonna pay a tax on that $500,000, but if your basis goes back to $50,000 because when you bought the property, then you're able to defer all the rest of the tax. So, basis on a property, I'm gonna get back to the notes, I know I'm just kind of getting the definition of 1031 exchange out there. Basis on the property is determined by your original purchase price. So as you're selling a property, you have to determine what is my adjusted basis. And the adjusted basis with the sales price, you can determine the gain you have on the property. So my original purchase price plus capital improvements minus depreciation is what my adjusted basis is. So if I bought the property, I'm gonna make up new numbers, I'm not gonna use the $50,000 one, I'm gonna make it different. So I bought the property for $200,000. Over the years that I owned it, I put $200,000 of capital improvements into the property. Capital improvements is anything that adds value to your property. It's not anything, a repair. So a repair and a capital improvement are treated differently. So plus capital improvements. So let's say I bought it for $200,000. I put $100,000 of capital improvements into the property. So my basis jumps up to $300,000. $200,000 acquisition price plus capital improvements minus depreciation. So that annual write-off I have on my investment property, you take off let's say it was $50,000 that I've depreciated the property over the years. So now it deducts from my adjusted basis. So $50,000 from the $300,000, my adjusted basis is now $250,000. When I sell the property for $1 million, right, that consists of two things. $250,000 basis value and a $750,000 gain that I will have to pay a tax on if I sell and don't do an exchange. Okay, so I have the basis and the gain to make up my $1 million sales price. When I do an exchange on my investment property, what happens is those two chunks, 250 basis and the 750 gain, must transfer to the next asset. That's the deferral piece, right? So you have 250,000 basis transfers first, and now I need enough value in the next property to push the $750,000 gain. So unlike a regular property that you may buy it today, I buy it for $1 million, my basis starts at $1 million. Well, not because of the 1031 exchange, my basis will remain the same, right? If I buy it for equal value, let's say. So if I buy a property for $1 million, my basis is still $250 and my gain is still $750. So the $750 gain has not gone away because of the 1031 exchange. So if you've ever done this in the past, and it's 10, 20 years ago, and you're looking to sell, and you did an exchange before, well, now you're gonna have to play with the gain that you previously deferred through the 1031 exchange. Okay, so that gain got pushed to the next asset, but like I said, a lot of people, most of my clients are gonna kick that can down the road until they kick the bucket. So what happens when they kick the bucket is you get what's called a step up in basis. So using the same numbers, let's say it's a 250 basis and a $1 million sale. Let's say it's me, I own this property, $1 million value, and let's just say it's me, and not me and my wife, and I sell it today, I have to deal with that $750,000 gain. Let's say I die today, my kids inherit the property, they inherit the property at step up in basis. So the basis value jumps up to the value of the property the date of the death. So now the basis they're dealing with after my death would be $1 million. So if they immediately turn around and sell it after death, they may not need to exchange because the basis is about the value of the property if they sell it fairly quickly. So if you ever have somebody that inherits property, that's always going to be my first question. When did they inherit? How long ago did they pass away? Because sometimes it was 10 years ago, right? So 10 years ago, I inherited the property, I kept it, I rented it out. Well, now you have a gain from death till now, so you may need to do a 1031 exchange. So that's the idea of the 1031 exchange. You know, you're trying to kick the can down the road. Most of my clients go into it thinking, you know, they're going to kick the can down the road forever. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes they eventually say, I'm going to go ahead and pay my taxes anyways at some point in time. And everyone's different. Some people get to a point where they don't want to manage property, stuff like that. So, but let's get into it. I just want to give you guys a brief recap on what's going on, the deferral piece, what 1031 exchanges, and what people are trying to do when doing a 1031 exchange. So, qualifying property, going back to the notes, qualifying property, you know, is again any real estate that's held for investment. Right? So it has to be investment property for investment property. Like kind requirement, again, investment property for investment property has to be real estate. I got the question earlier, can I go into stocks? No, you can't go into stocks or sell stocks and benefit from 1031 exchange. Can I go into a partnership interest? No, I have to buy a piece of real estate and take ownership as let's say I sell as Ken Harris, I have to buy as Ken Harris to benefit from the 1031 exchange. You have to be the same taxpayer to benefit that. So there's a lot of things, and I'm going to go into quite a bit, but let's use an example now, going back to what Terry said, a $50,000 purchase, selling it for say $5 million today, and it's your primary residence, right? So primary residence is strictly your primary residence. It doesn't qualify for 1031 exchange. But if you want to try to avoid paying all of the capital gains tax, I've seen people move out of their primary residence, rent it for 2 years. So 2 years is a holding period. You typically want the property you're selling as investment and then the property you're buying to be held for investment. So they rent it for 2 years. That now qualifies it for 1031 exchange. So now I could sell this property doing a 1031 exchange and also benefiting from the IRC 121 exemption. The IRC 121 exemption is if you're single, you're exempt on paying taxes on gain up to $250,000 on your primary residence, or if you're married up to $500,000, you're exempt on paying taxes on gain. So it's possible, and all you need to do to qualify for that is live there 2 out of the last 5 years. So the previous 2 years qualifies me as rental, qualifies me for the 1031 exchange. But being rental for the previous 2 years, living there for 2 out of the last 5 years qualifies me for the primary residence exemption. So now you could sell this property, if you're married, take $500,000 tax exempt, put it in your pocket, do whatever you want with it, and then you could 1031 exchange the value above the $500,000, but now you have to buy other investment property that you're going to hold for at least 2 years. So some people don't want to do this. It's too much. I don't want to move out. You know, where am I going to live? what am I gonna do? So the property you purchase must also be held for 2 years as an investment property. After 2 years, an exchange property, you can now convert to your primary residence. So I don't know if you have another home you could move in, or if you want to eventually move into this, or maybe you want to own investment property, or continue to own investment property. A lot of people want to go and own investment property forever. They don't want to depend on whatever they have in retirement, pension, Social Security, whatever they do. They like the rental income. You know, I can also get people that, you know, they're tired of managing property. They don't want to do that. You know, there's options for them too to go into maybe a DST, you know, that they don't have to manage, but you're taking a small percentage interest at a broker sponsor, you know, in a big apartment complex in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or something like that. So there are options for people that don't want to manage property anymore. But I just wanted to give you guys that trick of maybe doing a primary residence with 1031 exchange. There's an inconvenience there, but there's a possibility there too. Same thing with a second home. You know, a second home is not an exchangeable asset. You know, it's just a second home, you know, so that you also can convert to an investment property. When I say investment too, you could do the short-term style rentals. So if I do a short-term Airbnb, VRBOs, you know, that can qualify for 1031 exchange. And let's say it's your vacation home, your personal vacation home. So that personal vacation home, you can actually still qualify it for exchange and have some personal use, minimal, but you could get 14 days personal use on a property, or up to 10% of the time that you rent it out, and it still qualify for 1031 exchange. So let's say you're able to rent out the property 200 days that year, you actually get 20 days personal use, 10% of the time that you rented it out. So that's something to think about if you do the short-term style rentals, or if you have a second home or vacation home strictly for personal use, you know, there may be an ability there to rent it out and qualify that for 1031 exchange. Okay. Any questions at this point? You're good? Yeah.
My primary residence for 36 years, I've rented out my spare room about half of that time.
Okay.
Would that also qualify for a 1031?
Yeah, okay, so the question is she's got a primary residence for 36 years, right? Rented out a room, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rented out a room. So yeah, so any income producing aspect of that property can be considered part of a 1031 exchange. My question to you would be, were you claiming that as investment on your taxes? Because the proof is going to need to be on the previous year's taxes with the IRS and the franchise tax board. So let's say I'm just going to make up your house. It's a 5-bedroom house, and she's running out one of the bedrooms. So I would assume they've been claiming 20% of it investment.
1/6 exclusive use.
Okay.
Depreciation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 1/6 of it. So she could exchange 1/6 of the value. So 1/6 is, so let's say she's selling it for, you know, $1 million. What's 1/6 of $1 million? $180,000, something somewhere around there. My math isn't totally perfect, but so our exchange would have to be for the $180,000, the investment portion of the property. So, but this could be if you rented a room, right? What if you own a duplex and you live in half and you rent out the other half? The other half is also exchangeable. Or what if you run a business out of the property that you're claiming on your taxes? You do real estate out of your office. You do, maybe sometimes you have a daycare that might be run out of the office. There's a mechanic, you know, that's doing, you know, car work in the garage that they run as a business. That also qualifies it for a 1031 exchange. So anytime you see a primary residence, you gotta ask yourself, is there also an income producing aspect of this that could be exchanged? And yes, the answer is yes, you can do that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You've talked about being an owner and doing this exchange, and then when you die, you know, the benefit goes to your kids or your beneficiaries.
Yeah.
But how about if a couple owns it?
Yeah.
Then what? And one of them dies, they're not going to both die at the same time.
Yeah, and typically they die at separate times, right? So yeah, I mean there are instances, unfortunate instances where they could go at the same time, but The question is, I was talking about previously the step up in basis. Well, in his scenario is, well, what if you're married and one of the spouses dies first? So living in California, we live in a community property state. So one of the benefits of the community property state is when one of the spouses passes away, you get a full step up in basis with one of the spouses passing away. So the surviving spouse has the ability to sell that property at zero gain because a full step up in basis. If you guys have property, or if you know somebody that's out of California or in a non-community property state, I should say, then they only get what's called a half step up in basis. So let's say the value is, or let's say the gain is $1 million. Then in a non-community property state, it only steps up to $500,000. Steps up to $500,000. So if that spouse now wants to sell, then they're gonna have to worry about the tax on the other $500,000. If it's primary residence, they may be able to benefit for the $250,000 for the primary residence exemption. So the answer to your question is yes, the surviving spouse also gets to step up in basis. I know I used the kids as an example, so, but yeah, they can get away with that. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Good, okay.
But those states are not community property?
Yeah, there's only 9 community property states. Only 9. It's Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Washington, Idaho, and Wisconsin. So there's only 9. There's 41 non-community property states. So usually if you have out-of-state people, out-of-state family, then they don't get the full step up in basis. Yeah.
How do you document that step up?
It's with your CPA. And when someone passes away, typically you have someone will get a date of death appraisal of the property or properties, and to document that. Sometimes you'll hear, the husband passed away 2 years ago, but they didn't do that. You could do a date of death appraisal, pulling comps and things like that. So usually you got to get a date of death appraisal, work with your CPA to get the step up in basis. A lot of questions, this is good.
Is that $500,000 once in a lifetime, or can you use it more than once?
So the question is the $500,000 once in a lifetime or not? So going to the primary residence exemption, as a married couple, you're exempt on paying taxes on gain up to $500,000. You could benefit from that every 2 years. So I just had a call the other day, someone sold another house that they were calling their primary residence a year ago, and then they were gonna sell the one they live in now. They wanted to see if they could benefit twice from the primary residence exemption, but they weren't more than 2 years apart, so they couldn't do it. But you can keep doing that. It's not a one-time exemption. Yeah. Yes.
Does the step up when there's an inheritance apply only if it's a child or grandchild, or if a niece or a sibling of the owner dies, do they also get the step up?
I do believe they also get the step up. I always check with advisors, CPAs to confirm. I do believe they get this full step up if that's the inheritance, right? If it goes to my niece, then the niece should get this full step up in basis. You want to make sure too, how is title on the property? Make sure it's in the trust, right? If you have situations like it's held as husband and wife as joint tenants, it might not be, the best situation. So how you hold title to the property comes into play. But typically your person that passes away is hopefully the property's owned in a trust, they get the step up in basis, but all that stuff, when you go to buy a property, it's important to know, talk to your advisors about, how do I take title to the property? What happens in the event I pass away? If I hold it as husband and wife as joint tenants or community property, rider survivorship, things like that, we want to understand the consequences of that. But yes, your question was, who gets the step up basis if it goes to a niece, not just the kids or the grandkids?
It has to be a relative though?
I don't think so.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, her question was, if I was talking about the step up in basis, can it roll to someone other than a kid or a grandkid? Could it be a niece or maybe a non-relative? My answer is check with the CPA, but I do believe that whoever inherits your property should get the full step up in basis. Yeah, yes.
So when you're saying the step up in basis, when your spouse passes, for instance, are you talking about their 1/2 of the property as a full step up in basis, or the entire property gets a step up in basis?
Yeah, so the question is, when one of the spouses passes away, does that surviving spouse get a full step up in basis of just their half? Or is it a full step up in basis of the value? Right, that was the question, okay, good. So the question is, in the community property state, the full amount of gain, 100% of the gain gets stepped up. So let's say, using my example previously when I was talking about this, you have $1 million gain. In California, because it's and when I say in California, you have to reside in California. It has to be you have to live in a community property state. You get the step up in basis, the full $1 million step up. Where a new non-community property state, you only get the half step up in basis to $500,000. So community property state, full, it's not just your half, 100% of your half, it's a full step up in basis entirely. So if your value is $1 million, now your basis is $1 million in California.
Is that only if the property is held as community property? What about if it's held in a trust?
Trust is the best way. I believe, and now I'm not an attorney, I probably refer to Marissa or someone on title more than this. Trust is good. Community property, the right of survivorship gives you step up in basis. I think you want to be careful. Husband and wife as joint tenants, I don't know that you get the full step up in basis. So yes, the answer to that is the way you hold title does matter. Trust is the best. Okay. Talk to your CPAs and advisors on the way you hold it if it's different.
So from your experience, if it's in a trust, then the surviving spouse who owns half already anyways, not only his wife's half, but his half as well get a full step up.
Correct. So yeah, saying if it's owned in a trust, the surviving spouse gets the full step up in basis, not just their half, the one that passed away's half. Full step up if you reside in a community property state.
So when you say trust, are you talking about a revocable family trust?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So what if, the first spouse dies, then you get the step up, and then 20 years pass, and then the second spouse dies, and the value's gone up incredibly, then does it get another step up?
Yeah, so the question is, if one person dies, surviving spouse lives another 20 years, right? Then obviously there's probably going to be gain from first death to second death. So yes, then you get another step up in basis upon the second passing. So if that spouse, before obviously they pass away, sells it 20 years down the road, now they have to deal with the gain that they earned from date of death of the spouse, right? So there could be a full step up in basis then.
I just wanted to share real quick. Marissa, a colleague here, is a representative from First American. She's going to send me a list of how to take title and explain each of the things. So when I send out my notes, I'll be sure to include that. Okay, so hopefully that will answer some of the questions.
Okay. All right, so we're going to stop on questions right now. I'm going to move on to the notes to get those, and then we're going to have some time, I know, for Q&A towards the end. So going through the notes, adjusted basis, I already talked about that. How it's, original purchase price plus capital improvements minus depreciation. Investment property versus primary residence. On the next part of the notes, I kind of talked about that, right? Investment, you could have the investment property tied to a primary residence that you may be able to benefit from both 1031 exchange and maybe the exclusion of the primary residence. So always think if there's income producing aspect, or if I need to convert it to some type of income producing aspect to not deal with all of that tax at the end. Properties with mixed use, I kind of talked about that, having the duplex, and you run a business out of it, you may want to consider doing a 1031 exchange on the business portion, or the portion that you rented out. The 1/6 that you own, that you rent out. And you want to make sure too, it's on something that, that it's claimed on your taxes, you know, and you always want to make sure it's claimed on your taxes, because that's the proof. When you file for the 1031 exchange, the IRS is going to go back on the previous year's taxes, the 2 previous year's taxes. That's why we say hold it for 2 years, and make sure that you've been claiming this as your investment property, right? You know, if it's just claimed as in a second home, you know, if it's just claimed as your primary residence. You know, I get people that think they're smart, and they're, you know, I bought a condo by the college where my kids go into school. They did their 4 years, they graduated, now I'm selling, I want to do a 1031 exchange. And all of a sudden they say, well, no, I haven't been claiming the income on my taxes, or I know I wasn't collecting a rent. You know, so you got to be careful. If you have things like that where you have a relative living there, you can have a relative living there. You just want to make sure you collect a fair market value rent that you claim on the taxes. Very important. Letting people live there for free. Family members, you get that a lot. You know, in-laws or whatever. If you're not claiming a fair market value rent as investment on your taxes, then it's probably not going to qualify for 1031 exchange. So be careful with that. Like kind. So like kind, I kind of went into like kind. You know, any real estate held for investment, for any other type of real estate that's held for investment within the United States. Okay, so you can't get, I get a lot of Costa Rica, and I 1031 exchange to Costa Rica. No, you know, anything outside of the United States is not like kind with your real estate here in the United States for 1031 exchange purposes.
Did you say like the Virgin Islands or
Great question.
or Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so it gets louder when I get closer to it too. So her question is, did I say like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands? So she's going into U.S. territory, because I did say has to be reinvested in the United States. So great question. There's scenarios where you can potentially reinvest into Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. territory of the Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico, yes, is U.S. territory, but they're on a different tax system than us here in the United States, so Puerto Rico unfortunately does not work, okay? So don't think just because it's U.S. territory that it does qualify, because Puerto Rico doesn't work. And also, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the rule is you have to be doing business there. And I think people just saying I'm going to have an investment property there that I'm renting qualifies it for business. So if any of you ever want to go to the Virgin Islands, I say check with your tax advisor first, because there is this weird stipulation there that, you know, does just renting property qualify for that doing business there to qualify for 1031 exchange. So it is potential to get some U.S. territory, but not all of them. Okay, great question. So yeah, so like kind, you know, investment for investment, you got to think. Selling before buying. Okay, so most of what I'm talking here, you know, you're selling a piece of property, you have to buy another piece of property to benefit from 1031 exchange. Like kind property, equal or greater value. And generally speaking, you want to sell your relinquished property first. We call the relinquished property the one being sold, and we call replacement property the one that's being purchased through the 1031 exchange. So generally speaking, 90% of our transactions you're selling first, and then the money rolls into us as the qualified intermediary, right? And then you have 45 days to identify what you're purchasing, and 180 days to close on what you identify. So we hold on to the funds. You're not allowed to touch the funds, otherwise they become taxable. Within these deadlines you identify, if you close on this property you identified within that 180-day deadline, buy it before a greater value, you can defer all your tax. There's some scenarios, or some of my clients like want to buy first, right? And I'm not going to get too into detail on this because I could talk about this for 2 hours, but there is something called a reverse exchange that will allow us to buy the property. And when I say us, that means kind of me. First American Exchange will create a brand new LLC to buy the property that they're being purchased, borrowing the money from you as the client, to preserve that property as a replacement property for the future sale and 1031 exchange that would have to happen within 180 days. So there is a potential to buy the property first, but you can't buy it. You can't buy it and take ownership to it and then exchange into it, because you can't exchange in the property you already own. So just know, I don't want to go too in depth on this, and then if you guys ever want to sit down and talk about it or get on a call to talk about it, we could do this if it's something that you think you may benefit from. It is possible to maybe buy the property first, but there's more nuances to it, there's more fees and expenses to it. Some of my clients prefer it because now you've preserved the property, you know what you're buying, as opposed to in a regular 1031 exchange, sell first, you now have 45 days to identify what you're purchasing. And if you can't buy what you identified within the 45 days, then you're gonna have a failed exchange, you're gonna have to pay your taxes anyways. So a lot of people like the reverse, even though it's more expensive, because you got that preserved, you can complete it once you sell the relinquished property. It gives you 180 days to sell your relinquished property, so it kind of gives you time frames backwards. So I buy it, gives me 180 days to sell the relinquished property. So just so you know, there is potentially a chance to buy first in a reverse exchange. And if you take away anything from today, if you think about doing this, make sure you get us involved prior to closing anything. Okay, because I will get the calls and they say, hey, I want to do a 1031 exchange. I closed on it a month ago. Too late, right? Yeah. So unfortunately, you want to get us involved. And if you're ever thinking about doing this, even if you don't have any property listed, let me know. Let's talk about it. Let's game plan it. Let's get your CPA involved to see what is best for you guys. Okay? Because if you're selling any type of property, there's a lot more than we know, maybe more than I know, and then I have something that I can add to what the CPA is going to add and what your guys' game plan is. So just be proactive, get us involved, so we can hopefully help you game plan what's best for you.
I
Yes.
don't know, I just thought of this, could you buy reverse exchange like you're just talking about, buy 2 homes?
Yeah, so the question is, could you buy 2 homes? So yeah, yes, you could do a reverse exchange, but generally speaking, and even in a regular exchange, I'm selling for $1 million, and I want to buy of equal or greater value. I can buy 2 $500,000 properties. I could buy 4 $250,000 properties.
In another state.
In any of the states, yes, and potentially U.S. territory. Yeah.
Home for just in Mariana.
Yeah, exactly, Northern Mariana Islands, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, all right, so the sale proceeds, actually, let me go into that. So there is a restrict, I'm gonna give you this biggest negative to 1031 exchange, I think. When you do a 1031 exchange, you're not allowed to touch your money, right? So the money, the same equity, I think I said this in the beginning, equal or greater value and equal or greater equity, right? Equity is all the cash that comes out, the sale proceeds that comes out of your sale. That does not go to you upon the closing of a sale as it would on any other property if you're going to do a 1031 exchange. So that comes into us, the qualified intermediary. So this is one of the most important things when picking a qualified intermediary is we're holding onto your money. So you want to make sure your money's going to be there when you need it to buy the replacement property, right? Kind of important. So you guys, we're starting to run into situations like, it's called deferred.com. They're not charging an exchange fee, how they're holding up. I don't know, what are they doing with their money to make the money? So be careful with those. Like, I don't want to knock them, but First American Title, I'm going to talk about, we're part of First American. So we're under the umbrella. They guarantee your funds with our company, which I think is the most important financial security of it. So First American Title provides a subsidiary guarantee letter. We're a subsidiary of First American Title that guarantees your funds by a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company that's been around since 1889. So that's my short sales piece. Using an accommodator, make sure there's financial security in there. To save $200 on a fee or a few $100s on a fee, it just doesn't make sense, because there have been cases that some of these independent companies that people have ran off with the money. So just be careful when you're picking a qualified intermediary. You guys have my information, you guys can always talk to me, but if you're shopping around, just be careful on who you choose. So sale proceeds come into us, they're tied up with us for a minimum of 45 days. Some people will do an exchange, and they'll set up the 1031 exchange, not knowing if they're gonna identify and move on. So really, they're paying us a fee to buy themselves 45 days to see if they can find a good investment property for themselves, knowing they might not be able to identify anything, and they may just pay their tax, but it bought them 40 month and a half to look for property. So they can't come to me, there's a restriction on the fund. So this is going back to what I said, the biggest negative of exchange. They can't come to me on day 10 and say, you know what, forget about it, just send me my money back. Well, they could say it, and I'll send them their money back, but I can't send it back until after day 45. So anytime you do an exchange, your funds are restricted for a minimum of 45 days. The only thing I could apply your exchange funds towards is the acquisition of the replacement property during that 45 days. Okay, day 45 comes, you identify, let's say you identify 3 properties, you can always identify up to 3, even if you're buying 1, so you have 3 to choose from. Day 46, you're locked in. You can only buy what was submitted to us by day 45. So you have those 3 options if you submitted 3 options. If you can't buy what was identified by that 45-day deadline, and it's after day 45, we can only apply exchange funds towards the acquisition of the identified properties at this point. So if you can't buy what was identified, funds could be held for that full 180-day period. So 6 months, your funds could be tied up. You gotta know they could be restricted. The 6 months, 180 days, but also starts the date of close of escrow, the date of first closing, right? So if you're 45 days in, now you have another 135 days to figure out if you can buy what you identified, or cancel and get your funds back and pay your taxes. So regardless, you can pay your taxes, but it is just a restriction on when you can get the funds back. Some people, I think, play a game with us, or play a game with the IRS, I should say. If you do that, let's say you close right now, right, and you identify something, some people know they don't want to buy anything, but they'll identify something so that we don't release their proceeds until 2027. So you see where I'm going. So your CPA can file it as an installment sale and not have to pay the taxes on that money received until they file for their taxes, for the 2027 taxes, which is April of 2028, right? So I've seen the game. Some people will try to kick the can down the road a little bit for themselves. So I have seen that. But so just know there is potentially a restriction of the funds when you're doing a 1031 exchange. I think it's the biggest negative, which a lot of times is terrible, to try to save yourself hundreds of thousands of taxes and capital gains taxes. Missing deadline, so incorrect identification. So there has to be an unambiguous description of a property when you identify. When you identify, you have, that 45 days to identify. You can always identify up to 3. And I've been bringing up the 3. I'm going to add you one more rule. Because I mentioned, if you sell for $1 million, you can buy 4 $250,000 properties. So you'd obviously have to identify all 4 of those properties. So in that scenario, you have to identify under what's called the 200% rule. So under the 200% rule, if you sell for $1 million, you can identify 4 or more properties, as long as the total combined fair market value of all identified properties do not exceed 2 times the value of the property sold. So if I sell that property for $1 million, I can identify up to $2 million worth of properties. So I can identify 8 $250,000 properties. I identify 4 $500,000 properties. And if I sold for $1 million, all I need to do is close on 2 of those $500,000 properties to meet my equal or greater value. So you have a couple backups there, right? Same thing with the 250, 8 250s. I need to close on 4 of the 8 to meet my equal or greater value. So there is an ability to identify more than 3. Usually, if you're diversifying and buying smaller value properties, more smaller value properties. Okay. How many doing with time, Terry?
You got about 10-15 minutes.
10-15 minutes. Okay. Changing property type in the notes, so you can sell. A lot of people here like kind. and think, oh, I'm selling a residential rental, I have to buy a residential rental. No. As long as it's real estate held for investment, it can be exchanged for real estate held for investment. So I could go from that residential rental and buy a retail, sell retail and buy apartment complex, sell apartment complex, go industrial. So again, it's just real estate held for investment within the United States being exchanged for other real estate held for investment within the United States. So all the type of property is interchangeable. So don't see like kind and think, oh, it has to be the same type of property. That's kind of a big misconception. I get that question frequently. So you can change the type of property. Consolidating or diversifying. So I just went into the diversify. You know, you could sell $1 million property and buy for $250,000 property. So you can do that. You can also do consolidation of properties. So let's say you have multiple properties. You don't want to manage multiple properties anymore. And I'm going to sell 3 relinquished properties, $1 million each. And I'm going to go into 1 replacement property. So this gets a little more tricky, because usually your 3 relinquished properties will close on a different date. So you have time deadlines in a 1031 exchange, so the time deadline you want to follow, each sale is going to have its own time deadline, because each sale is a separate 1031 exchange. But you always want to think, when doing an exchange, you got to think the time deadlines of the first closing. Okay, so I'm going to consolidate, sell 3 to buy 1. I'm selling 3 $1 million properties. I need to buy 1 $3 million properties to meet my $3 million property, to meet my value. Okay, so sell 1 today, maybe relinquish property 2 sells 30 days from now, maybe relinquish property 3 sells 60 days from now. Okay, well, I still have to identify within 45 days of today, the first closing, and I still have to close within 180 days of today to meet the time deadlines of the first closing. So if I'm going to consolidate those, well, the replacement property has to be identified in the first exchange, right? And then close. So usually you want to sell all 3 before you close on the replacement property and before the 180th day of the first closing. So if you always think you're going to consolidate, you might have multiple time frames. Think of the first closing time frames. Like I said, first closing's today, 45 from today, 180 from today. Okay? Consolidating, going back to the reverse exchange, I've seen people say, I want to sell 3, but only 2 of them are going to close. And I have 1 more that I want to exchange into it. I've done a reverse exchange where I create an LLC, I park 1/3 of the property, the other 2/3 bought by the client. So they're able to satisfy the 2 exchanges, and I preserve 1/3 of the property for the future sale that hasn't happened yet. So there's things we could do in scenarios like that. If you're going to consolidate, it's quite common when you're consolidating, because you just never know the timing of all your relinquished property sales. Reducing management responsibilities. The one thing, a lot of people ask me if I could go into a REIT, a real estate investment trust, and the answer is no. The IRS views you going into a REIT is going into a partnership interest, right? So you're not going into a real estate interest. I keep saying like Heinz buying real estate for real estate. You can't go into a REIT, but there are DSTs, and I'm not going to go too deep into this. I have a DST guy who's excellent. He could teach you about it, but what you're doing is you're buying a small tick interest, a percentage interest in a piece of real estate. I brought it up a little bit earlier. And you know, you can put your money in there, you lose the ability of management. You know, you also have the ability to, if you buy a residential property, you can move into it after 2 years. You know, so you could also play the game on the other side. You know, if it's going to be your forever home. So remember, if you do convert to your primary residence, the gain didn't go away, right? You deferred it. So if you ever sell it, you're going to have to deal with the gain one way or the other. So there are tricks, or I shouldn't call them tricks because these are all legal things. You know, but there are, you know, things you could do if you're looking to, you know, try to avoid some tax, try to, you know, buy a place you're going to finally live in. So things to think about, things to talk about. Give us a call. We can discuss it. Like I said, get your CPA involved. 45-day, 180-day. You know, I talked about that. 45 days is the toughest part of this exchange. I was just on a phone with a guy, you know, on a phone call yesterday with a guy. you know, he was complaining that it's 45 days, that should be illegal, blah, 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 you know? So, you know, I can't change what the rule is, you know, the IRS has 45 days to identify. You know, why? You know, why can't you just reinvest in something and then 180 days? Well, you know, maybe they want some people to fail and pay their taxes, right? So how do you play the game, right? Closing triggers your time deadlines. So if closing triggers your time deadlines, you get an offer on the property you're selling that you're going to exchange, maybe you don't do a quick 30-day close. If you know you need to find a replacement property. I've seen people put in extensions. You know, if I can't close in 30 days and I haven't found a replacement property, maybe I can extend the property or extend the close of escrow 30 days beyond that. That gets tricky. I'll leave that up to Terry, but that gets tricky because sometimes your buyers might have rate lock agreements if they're getting a loan on the property. So it could get tricky, but something to discuss when you're, you know, writing up a contract with Terry and figuring out, you know, what's best for you, knowing you have to find something within a short time frame. I always say your best exchange is I'm going to close today on the sale, I'm going to close tomorrow on the purchase. You know, can you get a contingent deal? Again, I'm going to defer to Terry. Contingent deals are probably hard, right? Is the seller of the property you're purchasing willing to wait for you to close this relinquished property? You know, if they're willing, great. Will they accept your offer if you put in a contingent deal? You know, so that some of these things are hard, but it's something to think about as you're talking to Terry, trying to figure out, hey, what's a good offer? You know, what can I do? Maybe I'm gonna shoot to do maybe do a long escrow, and then we'll go to reverse exchange if it doesn't work out for 60 days. You know, so there's always something to talk about and something to game plan. Holding the exchange funds we talked about. Again, preparing documents. You want to get us involved. I mentioned this before. Please get us involved prior to any closing. You know, I prefer you get me involved prior to even entering contract. I won't open a transaction for you until you're in contract and escrow. But I can't set you up if you closed yesterday and you called me today for the first time. You know, so just, yeah, unfortunately you can't do that. You know, a lot of people think too a reverse exchange is, oh, I closed 2 months ago, so let's do the reverse exchange. No, you already own the property, right? The point of the reverse is to never let you take title to the property, so I get that too sometimes. You know, and like I keep saying too, bring in your CPA. Know your tax consequences. You know what I mean? Know that, because some people, the 1031 exchange isn't for everybody. You gotta do what's best for you, okay? Yeah, I think I touched on all the notes. Do you wanna take it from there?
Okay, everybody brain full? So much information, but, I mean, I learned a bunch of stuff, so I'll be able to better help you. Let's open it up for questions. Yes, we try.
If we sell our rental over here and buy, another house closer to our kids, and, we want to move there eventually, how long do we need to keep it as a rental?
I believe it's 2 years. The question is, if they sell the rental here and buy another house for their kids,
No, for ourselves.
for yourselves. I'm gonna let you,
Yeah.
just so that you're the expert.
Terry's right, it's 2 years. So 2 years,
Is it a
yeah.
strict deadline? Of 2 years?
Yeah, you wanna do 2 full calendar years. So if you bought it today, don't move into it for 2 years and a day from today, okay? You're gonna hear things in 1031 exchange too, 2 tax filings before you exchange it, but a conversion to primary residence, you wanna wait at least 2 full years to qualify for the 1031 exchange. Okay, and then you can convert to your personal use property, whether it be your second home or a vacation home, you could do that.
Tony?
For the reverse, the LLC thing, you said it's more complicated, but you always succeed at it, like from your side, is there ever like a time that it doesn't work, that you can't create the LLC or?
Yeah.
you just-
Okay, all right. So the question is, they're going to the reverse exchange. Is there ever a time that it doesn't succeed for our purposes? And right, that's basically the gist of the question. The answer is yes. A lot of times they don't succeed. The LLC we create to take title to the property is taking title to the property, right? So where's your obstacle here is the financing aspect of it. So you're buying $1 million property, if you're doing this, doing a reverse exchange, where are you coming, because I'm not coming up with $1 million. So how are you coming up with $1 million to buy this property that I'm gonna park for you? If you have cash, usually it's gonna work 100% of the time. If you need third-party financing from a lender, now you have a lender that needs to lend you an LLC as a non-recourse loan that's a shell entity. The sole purpose is to park this property that has no financials. So usually your commercial type property lenders are more willing to do this. If it's a residential property, your lender is unlikely to lend in a reverse exchange because they're not lending to you, now they're lending to me as a non-recourse loan. So the other thing that could block it too is if it's non-residential, we need phase 1 environmental reports. So if you have a retail with a dry cleaners or a gas station previously, you could have dirty land, and we can't park dirty land basically. So yeah, they definitely, there's roadblocks that could stop them from happening, yes. Yes.
We did a 1031 exchange and we had to take out, and it ended up going reverse, because it was a month difference. But he had to take out the LLC, now he wanted to cancel it.
Okay.
Because the state of California charges you for that.
Yeah.
How, what's the best way to cancel it?
Okay, so the question is, she did a reverse exchange, we created an LLC to buy her property and park it and preserve it for a future sale. So when she sold the property, she did a 1031 exchange and bought the property back from us essentially. But what we did when we transferred her the property, or whoever the QI was, the qualified intermediary, what they did was, they didn't create a new escrow and deed the property to her. What they did was called an assignment of membership interest of the LLC. So that's a transfer of the property. So the transfer means First American Exchange was the sole member of this LLC, let's call it ABC LLC, right? And when we transferred her the property, we removed First American Exchange and we inserted you as the sole member of it. So that's a transfer of real estate because the sole asset of that LLC is that property. So she's probably been owning it. The problem is LLC, California, there's an $800 annual tax to it, so not everybody always wants to hold it. So you're gonna need to, well, first deed the property from the LLC to yourself. How long ago did this happen?
Last September.
Okay, so you wanna make sure you deed it to yourselves in the manner of which you sold the relinquished property, because you still wanna meet the same taxpayer requirement. And if it's a California LLC, I could send you a link to go in and try to cancel it. There's some servicing agents that could do it, but you might be able to do it yourself. I can maybe guide you through that. I think you have my card or my information on the flyers there. Shoot me an email and just remind me of our conversation. I'll send you a link to the California website to guide you through that. Lost it. To guide you through that. Okay, of course. Press the connection up here. Is there a battery? Hello? Hello?
Okay, we'll just have to speak up.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
This is regarding the date of death appraisal.
Uh-huh.
You said to contact your CPA, but wouldn't you contact like a real estate appraiser to have that done?
So it has to be done, so you can contact a real estate appraiser, it has to be done by a licensed appraiser. Because I go through and I do little comparative market analysis, that does not count as an appraisal. But I would definitely still involve your CPA, especially if it's, I had a client, her husband died 10 years ago. And so we were still able to do a date of death appraisal, but she absolutely worked with her advisors in getting that done. So, I don't know if it actually needs to be done.
What Terry said is the answer to your question. I'm sorry, I probably confused you a little bit because I said an appraiser, like if they recently died, and then I said you have to, there could be a date of death one. But the answer is what Terry said. Yes, you still need an appraiser, a real estate appraiser to do that. But I think I guided you towards using comps and stuff like that. But that's what the appraiser will do to determine a previous date of death appraisal, yes.
So you'll end up paying for it either way. Appraisals run anywhere from $600 to $1,200 these days. But please, just as a safeguard, involve your advisors when you're gonna do that. Okay, more questions? Tony?
And the deferral happened more than once.
Yes.
So the question
Sorry.
is, can a deferral happen more than once?
Yes. Yeah, so, yeah, but you wanna wait that holding period, right? So you wanna hold it for a couple years, but you could do it 10 times. So if I do this 10 times, right, 100,000 each time, 10 times, now I have $1 million gain set in the property, right? So eventually you're gonna sell it, or the death happens and you get the stuff up in basis. But you could keep doing it as long as you wait the holding period in between doing it, yes.
Okay, more questions? Yes.
We sold a rental property, we bought a property that we were gonna rent, they said that we only had to rent for first one was a full-time rental, but since the second one, we were gonna use some personal time on as well, 14 days. They said that we only really had to rent it for 2 months, to qualify, it did not have to be a full-time rental like the first one.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, so I just wanted to confirm that that was enough.
Yeah, okay, so the question is, I don't know if this working still. Okay, so the question is, she did a 1031 exchange. The one she sold was a full-time rental, right? And then the one she bought is a part-time rental. It could be the short-term style rentals. And she was told she only has to rent it for 2 months out of the year to get the personal use of 14 days out of the year, correct? Okay, so I mean, the answer, I'm gonna actually disagree with this a little bit. I think you only need to get 14 days rented out during the year to get your 14 days personal use. So I'm not the final say-so on this, but I believe it's 14 days. And then you could get your 14 days. But to get more than 14 days, you gotta get it rented out, I guess more than 140 days, because it's either that or 14 days or 10% of the time that you rented it out. But yeah, you could do, if you rented it out for 2 months, I think it's perfectly safe to use it for personal use up to 14 days and still qualify for the 1031 exchange. The 2 months though, I think might only be 14 days. Okay.
What other questions? Yes, Linda.
I had a kind of funny thing, you may not apply to anybody else, sorry for this question. You made your point about owning these properties under your revocable trust.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, I have a place that I own myself, individually,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm considering doing a 1031 on the sale of a different property in a different state. If my trust buys my house from me, are these two different people and is this permitted?
Okay, so the question is, basically, I'm gonna shorten it a little bit. Can she sell her own property that she owns individually to the entity of her trust? The answer is no. You're you're selling to yourself. You're really the same taxpayer. So the trust, and I don't want to misguide you guys. I did say the trust is good for the step up in basis. Don't take my word for it. Talk to your advisors on how you hold title to the property, right? I'm not giving you advice on how to hold title. I just know the trust will give you that step up in basis. So don't mistake me for telling you have to hold it in your trust, blah, blah, blah. Maybe an LLC is better. Maybe you create a partnership. Maybe, there might be corporations that may be beneficial to you. So yeah, don't take me saying trust. I was just kind of talking about that for the step up in basis. So please consult with your advisors on that. But yeah, you can't sell it for yourself, but that's a good question. You also can't really buy from a related party, right? Related party being a lineal descendant, because they can consider that basis shifting. So buying from a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, a child, so it has to be a lineal descendant to be a problem. So you gotta be careful, because a lot of people might identify a third property, which is a relative's property, that may not qualify and they don't understand that. So be careful with related party transactions with yourself and related property transactions with a lineal descendant.
Okay. I'm gonna add on to Ken's disclaimer. Always involve your professionals. Yep. Ken is a professional, I'm a professional, but we rely on a group of people, other professionals, whether it's escrow, your CPA, your trust advisor, your financial person, your fiduciary, whoever you have in your circle. They all, for this type of money that we're talking about for capital gains and 1031 exchanges, get your people involved. Do not rely on our advice. Yes, we know a lot, he knows a lot. Now I know more, but you need to involve your group of, your circle of professionals. Okay, so make sure we understand that. What other questions? Yes.
That property I bought 36 years ago
Mhm.
took 5 months to close because the 1031 exchanged twice. So what are the risks of buying a property that is going through 1031?
So you were buying from a seller who was attempting to do a 1031 exchange.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so if I'm a buyer and the seller's doing a 1031 exchange, I suppose, like I was trying to give you guys earlier, kind of saying, hey, maybe you could delay the close of escrow. Ask Terry, maybe I could extend the close of escrow while I'm looking for a replacement property. Because remember that 45 days is a scary time frame to try to find something to benefit you. You know, I hate when I see a client get into a property that's a bad property just because they don't want to pay the capital gains tax. You know, I see that too often. So I'm assuming this seller of yours was looking for a replacement property. I think maybe, you know, I would probably leave it up to Terry negotiating this deal. Like if they want to extend close of escrow, maybe put a cap on it, right? Because if you keep getting delayed for 5 months, what's happening with your lender if you have a lender? You know, what are you doing? Have you already sold your property, right? Did you move into it? Where are you gonna live in the months in between? So I guess there is a risk with a seller, you know, playing with your mind a little bit. If I'm a seller and a 1031 exchange buyer's coming in, some people are scared because they think the seller can mess with them. And I suppose they could, but if I'm a seller, I want a 1031 exchange buyer. You know what I mean? Because I know they probably identified my property. I know they have to close one at a certain time, and I know they have money, right? So I think a 1031 exchange buyer is good. I think a 1031 exchange seller shouldn't be a problem. Can you run into problems like that? I suppose so, but it's probably rare.
So there are so many new disclosures in California when you do a real estate transaction that has to do with 1031 exchanges, simply to avoid problems like that. If I was your agent, I'd say, yeah, no. 5 months is a long time unless there's some financial remuneration, maybe. So there's a lot of ways to work around it.
I was 33 at the time.
So, yeah, so real estate was probably like a 10-page contract. Now it's 37.
Right.
So yes.
A little bit into the weeds, but we have a property that is essentially a vacation property. We follow the 14-day rule. We rent it out the rest of the year. I'd love to tell you that it's always rented, but of course they never are. And you need time to do work on them to keep them in shape.
Mm-hmm.
One of the practices we've engaged in is sometimes I or other family members will go to the property, stay there while we do maintenance work, cleaning, whatever it is, which constitutes not use of the property as a benefit, but maintenance and operation of the business.
Correct.
And so not taking away from the 14 days. Now, when it comes to the 1031 exchange, is that also the rule? Or does the 1031 exchange get into trouble if we were not renting more than 140 days? Because that's close to what we do.
Yeah.
And we use the 14 days as vacation, but we are sometimes there for other time to maintain it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's legal for tax purposes
Yes.
to run, when we're running it as a business and taking our deductions. Does that interfere with a 1031?
Okay. So the question is, he's got that vacation home or second home or whatever you want to call it, right? He rents it out, short-term style rentals, and he uses he follows the 14 days. He's able to use it for personal use for 14 days. But he or family members might have to go to that house for a month to maintenance, right? Whatever you have to do. I gotta paint it, I gotta put new flooring in. My answer to that is, no, that doesn't go against your personal use time because you're prepping it for sale. So I think you still get your 14 days personal use for you to, whatever it is, sit on the beach or be in the mountains or whatever you do with that house. I think your personal use is not eaten up because of the preparation of the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question. Anybody? Okay, well, I have a question.
Okay.
Where's my notes? As we're going through it, so is there a time limit to sell after a step-up basis? You know the answer to that.
Okay, so no, there's not a time limit to sell, but the longer it takes may create a gain, right? So if that's why usually if someone calls me and says, I inherited the property, I'm gonna ask when, right? I inherited it 3 months ago when my dad passed away. Well, there's probably not a gain from 3 months now, and if there is a gain, it's probably minimal or nothing, right? Yeah. Now they own the property for 10 years, you know, now you might have a gain, or probably will have a gain from 10 years ago till today. So there's no time limit, but now you're playing with gain again if you wait a long time. Yeah.
And then a couple of points that I thought were relevant to repeat. How you hold title matters. So like I said in the notes, I'll send out different ways to hold title, but always still involve your advisors. And then make sure your qualified intermediary is exactly that he's qualified, that he's from a licensed company. Because just like in real estate, you know, if you send money to the wrong account, that money's gone. So with a qualified intermediary, you know your money's gonna be safe. So super important, use licensed professionals, check their credentials, check their license, call me, I can do it for you, whatever. Okay, no more last questions? Sorry about no air conditioning today. So, as you know, everybody get out their little blue tickets that are in their folder. I give away, for those new people here, I give away 2 $25 gift cards just for taking time out of your morning to kind of spend. So open up your blue folder. Yep, open up that. It should be in the top left-hand corner. Okay? Right here. There you go. So if you open it up, in the top corner, you'll see a little coupon ticket. Okay?
I'll drop.
Somebody else want one more?
No cheating. You get the one that you have.
Ready? You wanna read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, 288.
That one's got blue on it.
Oh, they all have.
Yeah.
They all have.
I can tell you that's not the winner though.
Yeah, that's how I got them to stick on the thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so 28835-138.
There you go.
Okay, one more. And you have to be present to win.
I hope you know that you'll still be the winner. Okay, 28835-163.
Okay, so next month's seminar, we're gonna have 2 days on the September 8th and the 16th. It's selling as is. What you need to know before you list. Okay, a round of applause for Marissa, for bringing us
Thank you.
really, a terrific presentation. I learned so much. I know it was a lot of information. On the tables, you have Ken's cards. You also have some brochures that talks about it. Can they just call you
Call me.
directly?
Yeah, call me anytime.
So get them involved even when you're starting to think about it. Don't wait until you buy a property. Yes. All right, thank you all for your time. I'll see you